Trusting God's promises, provision and promises. Why did I choose this one? It jumped out at me when I saw the list. I can say something about that because I can actually attest to the provision of God throughout my life. Nothing major, no parting of the Red Seas for me, but lots of little individual reminders that God is faithful and he is with us all the time. During COVID, when things were difficult at home, sometimes when Mike was still ill, I would go down the high street and there was someone who I came to refer to as my stony hugger. She's a friend who goes to St Mary's and St Giles Church, and she would just see me and know that I needed a hug. I have my lovely friend Ruth over here who provided us with meals every single Sunday and Christmas days when they knew that I was never going to cook a Christmas dinner in my life, and I haven't. And I can go back throughout my life to those times when I have trusted God and he's come up trumps. So, Exodus and his people. So far, we've seen God call Moses and tell him that he's heard the cries of his people in Egypt, and together they were going to do something about it. God was going to take hold of his chosen people and change them from slaves of Pharaoh into a people for himself, whose unfolding story would show the world God's character and glory and ultimately lead us to Christ. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. So if those of you that were here a fortnight ago and heard Nathan say that his Old Testament lecturer said don't bring God into the text, you can't leave him out. The people and us were to be saved from all that enslaves us and saved for God's purposes. The God we see in Exodus is the promise keeper. He heard the cries for help and sent a reluctant Moses to Pharaoh with the request, "Let my people go." All 2.5 million of them. 2 weeks ago, Nathan left Moses and the Israelites having celebrated the Passover, and at last an exasperated Pharaoh had said to Moses, "Get out of here and be done with you. Go quickly, leave us alone." So off they went, but not until they'd plundered gold, silver, clothing from the Egyptians, as well as herds of livestock and their unleavened dough. A people in a hurry, but quite well equipped for their journey. Today, we gloss over the first part of the journey, which you can read about in Exodus 13 and 14, and catch up with them some 2 months later when they enter the desert of Sin. During those 2 months, God hasn't left them to fend for themselves, but has protected and provided them along the way. And the people acknowledge this, singing, "Who among the gods is like you, O Lord? Awesome in glory and working wonders." However, we read in Exodus 16, a whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around, eat pots of meat, and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve the whole assembly to death." how quickly we forget. And I wonder, why are they starving? They had all that livestock. What have they done with them? How much we like to grumble at the slightest little thing. The weather, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too dry, it's too wet. The world is, our politicians are. You can just add to the list. From the beginning of time, man has found something to grumble about. But Paul reminds us in Philippians 2 that we must do everything without complaining. A tall order. However, grumbles about food mask the people's underlying grumbles against God and their lack of trust in him. In Psalm 78, we read, "They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. He did miracles in the land of Egypt. He divided the sea and led them through it. They willfully put God to the test by demanding the food they craved. When he struck the rock, water gushed out. But can he also give us food?" Yes, slavery in Egypt had been hard and getting harder. But memories have a habit of making us forget the bad and only remembering the good. In this case, the fact that they had plenty to eat. Being released from slavery had been their wish, and this had now happened. But surely their journey to the promised land wouldn't be a long or an arduous one. I wonder how many of them would have even started out if they'd realised how long it was going to take, and how many of them travelling at that time, including Moses, would never actually get there. Grumbling about food would become the least of their problems. What's the point in the people grumbling to Moses and Aaron? They weren't going to be able to feed 2 million. With what? What would your reaction have been to this outburst? I give up. Okay, go back. But no. Exodus 16 verse 4 onwards says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that will be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." While Moses was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked towards the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in a cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know I am your God." Once again, God has heard them and answers them, providing further evidence if they needed it, and this group needed it, to be reminded day after day, minute after minute, that God was hearing and answering their prayers. He was always going to be there, providing for them at each stage of their journey, and beyond. This is the God of Exodus, who time and again proved to his people that he could be trusted to provide for them. The same God who we encounter daily and who provides for us. But we have a God who is a God of grace. Oh, sorry, I've turned over 2 pages. We have a God who is a God of grace. In spite of our words and deeds, he will meet our needs, just as he did the Israelites. As someone said, if these ungrateful, grumbling people had got what they deserved, they would all have perished in the desert, and then there wouldn't have been a chosen people, and there no need for a promised land. But God continued to bless them, care for them, protect them, and provide for them. And he does the same for us when we mess up. And he knows before we do the mistakes that we don't know we're going to make. But he said that he will never leave us or forsake us. And he doesn't. And he won't. He is a promise keeper. God didn't and doesn't have a judicial relationship with his people. Do bad, get bad. Do good, get good. He is a God of grace. This episode is showing the lack of trust that the Israelites have in God. They are projecting all their experiences of interactions with others onto God. People have let them down, and they're not sure whether God will not do the same. But he won't. He is the promise keeper. However, following on in Exodus, that evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who had gathered much didn't have too much, and the one who gathered little didn't have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until the morning." So they saved it until the morning as Moses had commanded, and it didn't stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Here we see the loving provision of God in that he didn't even make the people go out and find the bread or the quail. They both came to the tent They just had to go outside their tent, and there it was. I know I wouldn't have been so kind. In these verses, we do see God beginning to plant the seeds, or do we see God beginning to plant the seeds of the 10 Commandments in the minds of his people? Very clear instructions were given regarding the collection of the manna and the resulting failure to adhere to those commands by some, the lack of trust rearing its ugly head again, is possibly getting the people used to the idea that there would be consequences for not following God's instructions. Also, the idea of the Sabbath as a holy day of rest eventually became the 4th commandment. In instigating the idea of the Sabbath, we see another of God's provisions, the provision of rest. Giving them a day when they could rest from their labours was to be a blessing to them. However, by the time of Jesus, we see how the Jews had turned this blessing into a legalistic requirement, which even Jesus had problems with. He broke away from the legalistic take and reminded his detractors that the Sabbath had been made for man, not the other way round. And from what we've seen in our reading today, that was how it was. Any mention of bread in the Bible will eventually bring our thoughts round to Jesus, for doesn't he tell us in John 6 that he is the bread of life? After the miracle of feeding of the 5,000, Jesus was involved in a discussion about physical versus spiritual food. Don't waste your energy striving for perishable food. Work for the food that nourishes your everlasting life. The people said Moses fed our ancestors with bread in the desert. Jesus responded, "My Father right now is offering you bread from heaven, the real bread. I am the bread of life. The person who aligns with me hungers no more. Although you have seen me, you don't really believe." Manna sustained the Israelites on their journey, provided by God, not Moses, as the people had told Jesus. And Jesus will sustain us in our life's journey if we trust to travel with him. Trust that God, who provided for the Israelites on their journey to the promised land, will provide for us when we reach out to him with our needs and our requests. He won't always provide us in the ways or as speedily as we sometimes might wish. It did, after all, take the Israelites 40 years to reach their goal, but always, even in retrospect, God will answer our requests in the right way and the right time. Bread became an integral part of Jesus' rewriting of the Passover when he turned it into the Eucharist. Again, he was identifying himself with the bread which became his body, ultimately dying for us as he took the sins of the world, past, present, and future, upon himself on the cross. Another fulfilled promise of God, the provision of his Son to enable us to get back into a right relationship with him. In the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Give us this day our daily bread." And for those who are still hungry in the world, this will still be their prayer. But it could also be that we are asking the Father to let Jesus be with us every day. How else can we manage to do his will without him? In this chapter, we have seen God, the provider, the promise keeper, begin to shape this motley group of people who will one day become a holy nation with Christ at its head. Our Father, give us this day our daily bread. Amen.